So a few weeks ago, Mel and I were ambling up to Dallas from the Austin area, and we looked over on the highway and saw a really odd tower, and it caught both of our interests. We talked about what it is, what it might be, and it looked just really strange because of the domed top that it had. And, you know, I think the first thing one of us said was it kind of looks like a Tesla tower.
Dude, I want to know what that is. That is really bizarre. That does not look anything like some farm thing. That looks like some kind of military experiment or something.
City limits from Milford. So in or around Milford.
Anyway, we pulled off the road at a gas station. Oddly enough, there were Tesla charging stations for the Tesla electric cars. And we pulled off the road and we said, where are we? Realized we were in a little town called Milford. Just a very small, under 1,000 population farming town between Waco and Dallas. And we just kept wondering, what is that thing?
You can see it in the distance. Look at that shot. Do you see this? You put a warp stabilizer in there.
And Mel's just really good at that. She came across a Reddit conspiracy forum, people talking about this Milford Tower, and some of them were saying it looked like a Tesla tower. Other people were saying, no, that's a Texas oil drilling well, and they just have a strange cover on it to kind of take attention away from it. Well, that seems strange since it completely draws attention to it. It made us pull over off the side of the road. Other people had to be wondering what it is too. And then Mel found the company that was operating the tower called Visiv Technologies, and then it became apparent by looking on their pages that this was a very interesting piece of high technology. And we looked on the map and found a route over there and saw the headquarters of this place and got a closer look, and really only afterwards did we figure out what they're doing.
So pretty much this is the only way to get there and do it. You have to go back a ways and curve around.
Oh yeah, because this is not part of any highway exit. And it was very curious, completely just takes over the skyline. Again, it's a little farming community. There's nothing really going on in Milford, Texas. It's not even a place to speak of. I'm sure it's a quaint little town and everything. And we drove by the place. It must have had at least 50 employees just based on the cars in the parking lot. And there was some kind of security truck that checked us out when we drove by and seemed to follow us down the road. I don't know if it really was anything.
I got it.
Oh, dude, the use of any kind of device is a strict prohibited. You should go.
Yeah, but they can apply it to the road. Private property, no trespassing.
Then it was really only afterwards that we really figured out what was going on with this place. And it turns out it did make it into the news 2 days after we saw it on October 1st.
A strange-looking tower that's gone up just west of the highway.
The news team, Central Texas 25 ABC, just so happened to do a report on this tower 2 days after we saw it. And based on this news report, it's apparent that this tower's been up for a good year and a half.
When did you first notice that thing going up behind you?
About a year and a half ago.
Of course, people in the area have been talking about it and wondering what it is and joking around, quote, we thought we were going to walk around with a tinfoil hat on our heads.
People tried to figure out its purpose.
We aren't real sure. We're thinking we're going to walk around with tinfoil on our head.
Other people were thinking that about the tower, but then they talked to the PR person for the company, Visiv Technologies, and they admitted this is, in fact, Tesla technology. This is a wireless energy transmission tower, just as Nikola Tesla envisioned over 100 years ago.
Believe it or not, the theory behind this tower goes back more than 100 years to a scientist named Nikola Tesla. Had a theory about sending electricity through the air. Now the technology exists to make that possible. But first, Visiv Technologies has other experiments.
Communications and signaling, things like regional GPS.
And the story's notorious. A lot of people know Tesla actually attracted attention. He attracted investment, money for this project that he built off of Long Island in Wardenclyffe. It was called the Wardenclyffe Tower, and he was building a 187-foot tall tower, which had conductive wires going into the earth for more than 300 feet in all directions, which was theoretically able to transmit wireless energy, transmit wireless messages, even pictures.
Check this out, guys. We're here at Wardenclyffe, Nikola Tesla's laboratory, built in 1901. This is the original building here. It's all locked up right now because the people that bought it, they're getting ready to start putting together a museum. I think it's scheduled to be open sometime next year.
This is a place that could have and should have changed the world. I mean, this is where his wireless transmission tower stood, and not only could it have sent wireless energy worldwide and nationwide, but it had many other applications. But to sum it up, the bankers said, where do I put the meter? And Tesla said it's not supposed to have a meter. And, you know, a lot of other details happened, but the funding was pulled, and the world in many ways is more bitter and hollow ever since.
It was basically conceptually going to be a wireless internet long before there actually was any kind of Ethernet, ARPANET, internet, or today's Wi-Fi systems. And it was going to be capable of radio transmissions, but so much more. It was going to literally be able to power people's homes from remote distances. It's a pretty notorious story. People know about Tesla's genius, know how he was kind of the competition between Edison's direct current, Nikola Tesla's alternating current, and a lot of kind of black, harsh propaganda on the part of Edison and a lot of intimidation really got in the way of Tesla's projects and kept him in the shadows. But Tesla did manage to attract funding from J.P. Morgan, I think the Westinghouse family, and other really big players for his Wardenclyffe Tower wireless energy project. But when Marconi came out with wireless radio, which was actually based on Tesla's patents, the funding fell apart. The tower ended up being only partially constructed. I think it got to do some initial testing, but it was never complete and it just never came to fruition.
I mean, you can clearly see here, if you type in Wardenclyffe, that's the original building you'll see in that picture. I mean, I know there's a tree there in front of the stack, but that's the building. And if you see down here in front, I'll try to see, there's big bars right here, guys, sorry, but do you see that red bench right there? Orient yourself to that. Now look directly behind it at that kind of octagonal cement shape that's around in a circle behind this statue. Can you see that outline there? That's where the original tower stood. And I believe it was pulled down and scrapped in 1917 to pay off his debt on the place after, you know, J.P. Morgan pulled the funding and all that. But it used to stand right there.
And so what was perhaps Tesla's greatest dream, or the greatest one that the public seems to know about, of producing basically free or very cheap electricity for entire populations, maybe even around the globe, was pretty much shelved for a solid century, and Tesla's name was largely buried in the history books. A lot of what he worked on, well, was frankly just stuck in his head and never written down. The things he did describe in his notebooks and his sketches were pretty much seized by the military, I think the Navy in particular, branches of the FBI and other internal agencies, who seized them after his death in 1943 and most likely used them in the development of a number of covert and black projects, which were probably weaponized. So a lot of Tesla's potential was buried on the secret side of things, or just lost to time after his death, and his inability to be successful as a businessman and not just as a genius inventor.
Over the years, there have been multiple letters written to the FBI and released later in FOIA requests asking whether or not the FBI went through Tesla's room and confiscated his papers shortly after his death. This was a widely held belief because of a book written which claimed that right after he died, the FBI went in and confiscated all of his stuff. The FBI has repeatedly denied this claim. Every time somebody asks, does the FBI have Tesla's scientific papers, the FBI would write a letter back saying their files reflect that the effects of Nikola Tesla were taken into custody after his death by the Office of Alien Property and not by the Bureau, and since they did not participate in the handling of his effects, they're unable to supply any information about him. But going through these papers that the FBI released via FOIA request, there was one very interesting letter that stuck out. And that's this memo dated April 17th, 1950, which discusses a warehouse, a storage unit that Tesla had at the Manhattan Warehouse and Storage Company on 52nd Street and 7th Avenue in New York City. And they talked about how no one had had access to that storage unit except right after Tesla's death in early 1943, when an examination was made of his effects. Michael King, who was the floor supervisor of that warehouse floor where Tesla's stuff was kept for approximately 10 years, stated that at the time, numerous photographs were taken by examiners. His description of the equipment used would tend to show that a microfilm reproduction was made of some of the papers of the deceased scientist. Mr. King also added that several of the group making the examination wore U.S. Navy uniforms, and during the 2 days required to complete the examination, the civilian assistants in the group were identified to him only as, quote, federal authorities. According to Mr. King, no other instance of microfilming of the records of Tesla has ever taken place since that time. This is the same time period that Albert Einstein was working as a part-time consultant to the Navy's Bureau of Ordnance. What's interesting about that date, 1943, is that later that year, the Navy was actually involved, widely believed, in the Philadelphia experiment, which supposedly happened on October 28, 1943, when the USS Eldridge disappeared at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. Of course, the U.S. Navy denies this ever took place. This guy did change the world. Unfortunately, a lot of what he did was weaponized.
For a long time, he wasn't remembered here. They pulled this, they scrapped it, and Tesla was left out of the history books. I think it was only the advent of the internet that brought his memory back, and now our generation and younger generations, they know who Tesla was, but my parents growing up, me in school, we never had any idea what Tesla did or why he was important. We knew names like Einstein and Edison, but Tesla, well, he really opened up a whole new doorway that sadly has been weaponized and kept secret by a government and a para-government who've used it to control people instead of to free them. It was completely flipping the pyramid.
But all this time later, well over a century later, in 2018, this company, Visiv Technologies, is actually trying to do this. People have talked in conspiracy threads across the internet about hidden history, about the things Tesla was trying to do, and now there are companies actually trying to achieve that in the real world, and they've built this tower, this very curious tower in Texas, that is either now undergoing or soon to be undergoing experiments in wireless energy transmission. And so Visiv Technologies describes this on their website. There's also entries in the Waco Tribune Herald about the partnership with Baylor University. They've got people working on this tower, and they describe how this tower works with a phenomenon known as xenic surface waves to transmit electromagnetic waves along the interface of Earth and air. And they describe it slightly differently here. It's the field of electromagnetic surface waves. And in a very eerie fashion, Visiv Technologies here in the 21st century says they're going to bring power to the planet and light to the world. They're going to be light bearers. Heard that before. And the thing is that the application of the use of these surface waves is virtually limitless. It could be used for communications, typical telecommunications, cell phones, internet, email, telephone, radio, but also for literal transmission of energy, actual power, to sensing, sort of passive electronics. And with the energy alone, I saw a special on PBS a number of years ago covering Tesla, his inventions, and the potential of them. And they talked about how even natural gas, it could be somewhere remote, say like Alaska, where they have a ton of it. And with some of these designs that Tesla came up with over 100 years ago, they could literally convert natural gas into an electromagnetic wave, transmit it either up into an orbiting satellite or across to another one of these towers and downlink natural gas energy in somewhere remote, say Japan or an island somewhere or mainland United States, and bypass the use of really expensive, really controversial pipelines.
Microwave technology has already made it possible to transmit wireless power.
And in Alaska, there is natural gas. In order to send it somewhere, you have to create a pipeline. That's very expensive. So we said, all right, let's go into Alaska, create microwaves from the natural gas, send them to a satellite, put a reflector there, and send it to Japan. And in Japan now, you get an antenna which transforms this microwave into 60 hertz and you get electricity. So you make essentially Tesla's dream.
So there's a lot of potential. At the same time, this company today and the people who've had their hands on this technology for a century now are very closely tied to the military, and you better believe there are weaponized applications for this as well. The president and CEO, General Michael Miller, is a retired U.S. Air Force brigadier general who's dealt with budgets as large as $6 billion, personnel as many as 40,000, and has been involved at the corporate and operational strategic planning level of the military for decades, for over 28 years. Meanwhile, the executive vice president for business development comes right out of Chevron's executive branch. He was vice president for emerging technologies at Chevron's Technology Ventures. He dealt with more than $400 million in venture capital. Meanwhile, the chief technology officer at Visiv is involved in microwave applied metrology, that's very precise measurements, has multiple patents and inventions involved with guided microwave spectrometry, and has been dealing with sensors for biomedical, industrial, and scientific applications, as well as the development of wireless power transfer using Zenit surface waves. So there's that. This company has yet another military official, Richard T. Devereaux, who's involved with the government affairs for the company, and who was involved with the Air Force and the Pentagon for decades. And then a lawyer out of Vincent and Elkins, just a high-powered law firm. And anyway, this company is just deeply involved in it. Again, they've got partnerships with Baylor and other surrounding universities, and they're going to actually finally try what Tesla dreamed of all those years ago, what he almost achieved and accomplished. And it's just hard to say if this is a positive development or not, because there are so many applications for this technology at this point. The dream of free electricity, free wireless, ubiquitous internet makes a lot of sense, but at the same time, after all the research Melissa and I have done, and so many countless others have done on mind control applications and the use of very high technology, pulse to microwave frequencies.
The Central Intelligence Agency had carried out a bizarre series of behavior modification and mind control experiments on unwitting citizens.
I've been reading this book here, Cross Currents, The Perils of Electromagnetic Pollution by Dr. Robert Becker. All of the studies from the 50s on were funded in large part by the military. And so the results that came out ended up jiving with the military stance on how non-ionizing radiation is fine.
Microwaves, and there are differing views on how much radiation is bad for your health.
It's all kept a deep, dark secret by the two superpowers. The Russians dramatically boosted the intensity of the microwave bombardment.
The U.S. government began measuring the levels of microwave radiation in the environment.
Concern over harmful health effects was very real.
The anxiety state is produced by chronic exposure to microwaves.
Microwave radiation can produce medical problems.
The neurological effects.
Neurological meaning what?
Well, effects on the nervous system, irritability, sleepiness, memory loss, headaches.
This very same technology undoubtedly could be used as a military weapon to pacify entire populations, to target overseas populations, but it could also save them. It could deliver them essential services. It's definitely a sign of the future that pulls directly from the past, however. The very technologies they seemingly have kept from us for such a long time, while keeping us on the oil and gas, petroleum system, the dinosaur system with cars, well, it may finally be passing into a new era if experiments go as planned, if they do what they claim they could do. This could change the world. Who knows? It just remains to be seen. That's definitely something they talked about in this news broadcast. They interviewed a person who said, I think it would be awesome to help out
countries where people have limited abilities to have communication.
Makes me think about maybe Puerto Rico or places where they have a natural disaster
Right.
and this kind of
You might
technology.
be able to send them information and power that they don't have.
They claim it's going to help with regional GPS and radio navigation, broadcast signaling. It could power things through the air, as I've said. One thing that is very interesting is that the SEC filings for the company, Visiv Technologies, who were previously known as Texon Technologies, who are again based out of Waxahachie, Texas, a little closer to Dallas, but operating this tower out of Milford. On top of their CEO, Michael Miller, who is in the military, and their other officials, there are two brothers, James Coram and Kenneth Coram, and both of them have been involved in some high technology experimental testing for a long time, since the 60s and 70s. And Dr. James Coram in particular has been researching all the effects, all the related science around electromagnetics, antennas, radio frequency telecommunications, radio astronomy, and so forth and so on for decades. He's consulted for the National Security Agency, for DARPA, for the DoD, for the Defense Intelligence Agency, for the CIA, for the NRO, for the IDA, and all these other acronyms. And he's been deep in this stuff. He's been researching plasma science. And according to Al Bielek's site concerning the Montauk conspiracy, Dr. James Coram also conducted experiments into the hypothetical, kind of rumored, kind of stranger than fiction Philadelphia experiments, where they supposedly experimented with time travel and disappearing ships based on Tesla's technology. Well, he apparently found that there was a very real basis to this very out there kind of stuff. And basically, James F. Coram has been following the thread of Tesla technology for a long time. Stuff that the mainstream either dismissed or believed was impossible, he's been testing and trying to put into practice. And therefore, they've got a page for him on the Tesla Memorial Society, which is at the old Wardenclyffe site on Long Island. They've got entries for him on sites about the Montauk experiments and all the really weird stuff that a lot of people believe and other people don't think could have even happened. I'm a little bit on the fence on it because the stuff is so weird, but quite frankly, there's a basis for it. And it's very obvious that someone at least looked into it because we researched as much as we could surrounding those weird events, and it's pretty clear that some kind of military scientific endeavor did take place. Whether or not any of that weird stuff was possible, I don't know, but mind control has very much been on the table for a long time. And here they are with a wireless power distribution tower right there in Texas in plain view right off the highway. And curiously enough, it's very closely in the footprint of what was once going to be the superconducting super collider based out of Dallas, but really located in Waxahachie, and only maybe 15 or 20 miles from the Milford Tower site. So whether there's any interaction there between that abandoned site, which some people claim may have been completed, between that site, which has now been used by oil and gas companies, data storage companies, and all types of other experimental technology companies, whether or not there's any involvement between that really gigantic facility, which was once going to be bigger than CERN, and that they built at least 14 miles of tunnels for and spent over $2 billion for, whether or not there's any connection between that and Visiv Technologies' attempt to bring to life Tesla's wireless energy transfer tower outside of Milford, well, it's difficult to say if there's any connection, but there very well might be. It's very curious, and a lot of people on the Reddit conspiracy forum pointed that out, and it's pretty hard to dismiss, honestly, since already just the fact of there being a Tesla tower off the side of the road seems like science fiction, and yet it actually happened. It was a rumor, it was speculative, we saw it off the road, said, hey, what is that, a Tesla tower? Not expecting it to actually be admittedly one, and it is. That's the day and age we live in. It was a Tesla tower, it is a Tesla tower, and they're soon to be turning it on and experimenting with it. In the next 10 or 20 years, it may change the way that we live. What do you think about that?
Wow to that. That are working at this laboratory they're building.